Hello there, Michelle Short here for My Favourite Things. Today I have a cute Valentine's card to share with you using the new Honey Bunny set. So let's get started. This is the adorable Honey Bunny set. There's lots of sentiments, some cute little birds, some bunnies, some clouds. Absolutely adorable. So I have stamped out the bunny on the balloon and also some clouds onto white cardstock using black ink. I'm then going to colour in the images using Copic markers. So I'm starting off with my darkest shade for the fur, which is E59, and I'm just mapping out where I think the darkest areas would be. I think it is very easy to get caught up with light sources and making sure that it's correct and where it's going to be and everything like that. Ultimately, my main aim is to actually just enjoy colouring in the image and also have an image at the end that I'm happy with. So if I mess up with light source, I'm not too concerned about it. But having said that, I am trying to make it so that it's going to be lighter on the left hand side and darker on the right hand side. Now with most objects, they are kind of curved, especially bunnies and balloons, so I don't want to have it completely light just on the left hand side and all dark on the right hand side. So although I'm keeping the bunny kind of in that way, I want to have the balloon have some darkness on the left hand side to make it look a little bit more realistic. So I'm just blending out the E59 using the E57, and then I'm going to go in with my lightest shade, which is the E55. So here I'm adding that colour on her leg, and as you can see, there is quite a big difference between the E55 and the E57. There isn't always when I colour, but for some reason on this particular occasion, there was quite a big difference. So what I'm going to do is I am going to bring in the E57 back, and I'm just going to go over the area and then bring back in the E55 and blend that out further. But because I'm doing this while the paper is very wet, because the Copic markers are a wet medium, at least to start with, I am going to end up getting a little bit of bleed through. So ordinarily, what I usually would do is I would colour over the lightest area. I would let that dry a little bit and then go back and try and blend it. But in this instance, I did it all in one go, and I'm going to get a little bit of bleed through onto her top. So I'm going through all the other areas here, and as you can see, her face is not blended in the slightest, but I know that I'm going to go back to that. So here is where you can see where the bleed through is coming out. And so there are different ways that can be covered. You can try and push it out with a colourless blender, but to be honest, I found the best option for most of the time is just to go over it with whatever colour you're going to use. Now, ideally a kind of dark colour so that it's going to cover it a little bit, and in this instance I knew that I was going to use a dark colour, so it worked out okay. But sometimes with that colourless blender it can sometimes make it a little bit worse. So I'm just colouring in the inside of her ears here with some pink colours, and then I did use a little bit of brown as well, a lighter brown, just to try and make them kind of blend together. And then here is where I'm colouring in her top, and like I said, I knew that I was going to use some darker colours, so it worked out okay with that bleeding because it just completely covers it with this dark shade. This is the RV69, and then I'm going to blend that out with the RV66 and then use my lightest shade, which is the RV55. I knew that my background was going to be pink, so I wanted to add a little bit of pink onto the image. And then just colouring in her nose there with the R21 marker. So I wanted to colour in the balloon red, and this is the darkest shade, which is the R89. And I apologise for my head getting in the way here, but this is a very dark saturated colour, and there was a good chance that I was going to accidentally colour over the bunny, so I had to really lean over here to make sure that I didn't do that. So what I said here about the image being curved, so I'm going to add some of that darker area on the left hand side of that balloon. So hopefully it's going to kind of appear that each side kind of rounds out I suppose. So but I also still want the most of the darkness to be on the right hand side, so I'm just going to leave a small highlight on the left hand side. So I'm blending out between the colors of red here, and then once I get to the middle, I'm using my lightest shade, which is the R32, but it is quite light and it does kind of saturate out the R35 a lot. So I go between them just to get the look that I'm going for. And then I can just finish off that little bit of the balloon there with the R35. And then for the clouds, I'm using some aqua shades. Now in real life, clouds probably aren't aqua, but because I'm using pinks and reds and things like that, I thought the aqua would work quite nicely with them rather than grey or something like that. So I used BG11, I'm blending out with BG10, and then blending that out further with the BG000, and then I also then blend out even more with the colourless blender, just to try and blend that to white on the left hand side. And I do the same thing for all of the clouds. Once the colouring is completed, I'm going to take the Coordinating Honey Bunny Dynamics, but because the string of the balloon is solid, pretty much if you line up the rest of it, it's probably going to cut fine, but I wasn't 100% sure. So what I did was I cut it from some pink cardstock, and I'm going to use that as a template so that I can cut out the image perfectly. So I've just cut the back panel clouds off just so that I don't kind of accidentally cut into it or something like that. And I'm just placing that template over the top. I've held that down with some low tack tape, and then once you pop the die inside, it kind of pops in like a puzzle piece. So I've run that whole thing through my die cutting machine, and I can just pop out the die cut, and I can reuse that template multiple times. And then I've just cut out all of the clouds as well. I've now got a panel of white cardstock. This is 5.5 inches tall by 2.25 inches wide, and I'm just temporarily adhering that onto some scrap paper. This is just some grid paper so that I can try and make sure that it's straight. It doesn't really matter, but I just for some reason find that grid paper is really helpful as scrap paper in the background. I'm then taking the rolling cloud stencil, and I'm going to use this to add some clouds onto my background. So I'm taking Picked Raspberry Distress ink. I'm adding some of that onto my blending brush here, and I'm going to blend that on so that I can add the clouds all the way from the top to the bottom. I personally find that it's easier for me to add clouds in this way, like starting at the top of the panel and working my way down. So I'm focusing most of the colour towards the bottom, which actually is the bottom of the cloud, and then as the kind of sky goes upwards, so where the ink kind of lightens, that would be the top of the cloud. So I'm just rotating that stencil so that I can get some different sides kind of moving down this panel. So once I'm happy, I can hold that in place with some low tack tape, and then I can blend away on each of the clouds. And like I said, I'm leaving a little kind of white highlight at the top of the cloud. So I can just finish up here with that one at the bottom, and then right at the bottom I'm just going to add some ink blending just at the bottom of that panel. So next I'm going to stamp my sentiment. So I'm taking the sentiment from the Honey Bunny set, and I'm going to stamp it down onto some black licorice cardstock. So I've just placed that in the Mini MISTI, trying to make sure that it's as straight as possible. And then I can close the MISTI door to pick up that stamp. I'm going to prep the cardstock with an anti-static powder tool. I'm just going to remove any excess powder with a brush, and then I can ink up my stamp with Versamark ink. This is a clear sticky ink so that when I add my embossing powder on top, it's going to stick to it. So I'm just inking up that stamp really well. I apologise that it is off screen, but I do like to stamp sentiments in this horizontal form of the Mini MISTI. So just pressing that down lightly onto the cardstock. And then I can apply some detail white embossing powder, and I do like to do this a few times just to make sure that I get a really nice coverage of that embossing powder, and then I can heat set that until it's completely melted. And I like to heat set from the front and the back. It does tend to help a little bit with warping. And then I've cut that sentiment down into a strip. So here I've got all of my components, and I'm just figuring out where I want them to go before I stick anything down. Once I'm happy with the placement, I can add some thin foam tape onto the back of some of the images. So I'm starting off with this cloud here. I want that one to be popped up. So I'm just kind of moving my panel here to make sure that it's straight. So popping that down, and then the one here that's going to go behind the bunny's ear, I'm actually just going to use some tape runner and stick that down flat. I'm then going to add some more thin foam tape onto the back of this bunny here. I can remove the backing off of that foam tape, and then I can press her down onto the panel as well. So just using some tweezers just to help me out with the placement, and then once I'm happy I can press that down. And then for the cloud there on the left hand side, I used a little bit of tape runner and also some foam tape as well. And then I can just add some foam tape onto the back of the sentiment, and then I can pop that down at the bottom. Again, I'm just trying to use my grid lines on my mat here just so that I can try and place these elements down straight. I've then added some more thin foam tape onto the back of that panel, and I'm adhering it down onto an A2 size white card base. So that's a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. And then I can just make sure that everything's well stuck down. For some embellishment, I'm going to add some iridescent droplets. So I'm taking some of the On Point Precision Glue and I'm just adding small dabs of that onto the panel, and then I can pop the droplets on top. So I'm just adding a few around the image. I generally like to add embellishments in odd numbers. And then I can add some black glaze pen onto her eyes, and that's just going to help them pop. And then I'm also going to add a small amount of clear glaze pen onto her nose, just to add a little bit of shine onto that. And once that dries, that's going to dry a little bit glossy. And so that is the card finished for today. Something a little bit different with the panel down the right hand side of the card. And I love all the dimension on the card and also those lovely pink clouds in the background. And that bunny is just absolutely adorable. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.